Today we are going to place here the last chapter about communion. We have been talking about various aspects of it, and I encourage you to listen to the previous podcasts, 10 of them. Now this one is the last one, and the question is, when you take part in communion, what is it you are taking? You are in church and people say the body of Christ, the blood of Christ. This is just a shortcut to a whole sentence, but that is what they say. And you look at Jesus on the day he instituted that communion, he told his disciples, "This is my body, this is my blood." And we know that in speech producing, in orality, this is a figure of speech. Just like if I show you my picture and I say, "This is me," you know it's my picture, but it's me. It's a picture of me. And that's what it meant. But there have been big disagreements over the years on this subject. And this is a book that I commend to you, The Meal That Unites, ? That was published some years ago in actually '81, but it's still valid. And to understand what happened and whether you should take communion in another church, you have to look at church history. We know that the disciples were doing what Jesus told them to do. They shared communion, and it's well written. The practice of it is described by Paul in the first epistle to Corinthians, chapter 11, verse 23 to 26, where he's talking about love feast and then communion that followed it. Just like Jesus instituted communion at the end of the Seder meal on Passover. Now we know that in 1831, somebody that is absolutely unknown today, that is called Paschasius Radbert, wrote about the body and blood of Christ being real. I mean real, not bread, not juice or wine, but a piece of the body of Christ. And he said it is real. There was no room for faith. It was just a material thing. That if you ingest it, then you are eating flesh, And that was going from picture of something to the real thing. It looked like just a statement, but it is written that within 100 years from then, it was widely believed. And then in 1059, that is 1059, the Council of Rome officialized it in spite of the protest at the time of the then Archbishop of Canterbury. Then in 1215, the Council of Latran officialized it, and it's at that time that it became what it is known today in Catholic Church, transubstantiation, meaning that the bread becomes flesh, the wine becomes blood. It changes substance. And then gradually over the centuries, Catholic Church started celebrating Mass no more as a remembrance, but as a sacrifice. And it's at that time that the altar, if you look at the old churches, then the altar was facing the people, and the priest celebrating Mass was backing the people and facing the altar. And the altar was talking about sacrifice. Sacrifice that the Catholics today believe to be renewed by the Mass every day. At the time of what they call consecration, a prayer, the first part of the Mass is just the word being written, being read. But then the second part is consecration of that bread and wine, and then they believe that it is the real blood and body of Christ. And if you take it, you ingest it, flesh and blood. Now, what is it that we know that Jesus on the cross said, "It is finished." And it is written all over the New Testament that the sacrifice of Christ was once done forever. There was no need for any other sacrifice or reenacting of it, making it again. It is finished. And no one can sacrifice Jesus again. So, when we come together and take communion, what we do is not taking the flesh and blood of Christ in real sense, but approaching him, touching Christ in a special way by faith. And it's by faith alone. By faith alone. And remember that if you have no faith, God will not accept you. You need to have a relationship with him, to have it by faith and faith alone. Pure faith that is not attached to what you see, because it goes beyond what you can grasp by the sight. And what is important now is that Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me." And Paul, in the letter to Corinthians, says that we do it and proclaim. Every time we do it, we proclaim the fact that Jesus died for us until he returns. So it's both a proclamation of Jesus' death and it's a proclamation in our belief that he promised he was coming back and he is coming back. So that is it. And you should not confuse them. By faith, we take part, we identify with the body. And Paul said it is important to know what is the body. It's the body of Christ, and remember the church is the body of Christ. So every time we take communion and we identify with the body of Christ. We have a close, intimate relationship with Christ again. He in us and us in him, in the church. And that is what it is. We are not taking the flesh and blood, we are taking bread and wine or its substitute, describing as an emblem, as a symbol of Christ sacrificing for us. But he has done it once and for all. So rejoice in the knowledge that it is all finished. Bless you.